Hi, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Bay Chamber Center for Responsible Business. And this is our first webinar of the Bay Chamber Sustainability Network Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion. And the topic, as you all know, is global best practices and benchmarking for designing and driving diversity and inclusion at workplace. And I have with me my colleague, Mr. Charles Coe. He's the Program Manager, Center for Responsible Business. Actually, if you ask me, I'm personally very happy to organize this webinar today, because I remember 3 years back when we first started this task force on diversity and inclusion. And that was a time when our task force member companies, they chose this as a very high priority of intervention for themselves. They wanted to make a difference in terms of diversity and inclusion at workplace. And they were at a very nascent stage of starting their journey. And then the task force organized in last 3 years many seminars, webinars, workshops, developed toolkits for what is the importance of diversity and inclusion at workplace, how it improves in business performance, and what are the various kind of pillars that can be taken up in diversity and inclusion, how to eliminate conscious and unconscious biasness at workplace. And not only this, one of the most neglected area of diversity and inclusion as a pillar is working on PWDs, or social inclusion and employment of people with disabilities. And to your surprise, our task force has very specifically focused on various dimensions of PWDs as a part of diversity and inclusion task force. And we have organized several workshops even in this area on how to recruit people of determination at workplace. We have also organized best practices seminar on universal design code to provide accessibility to people of determination. And it was very overwhelming to see last year during COVID-19 situation and lockdown, that companies came up with this need and requirement that how to engage people of determination at workplace, and how to make use of various assistive technology in order to engage them remotely. So it's really very overwhelming that companies have come a long way. In fact, in last 3 years, diversity and inclusion task force member companies have been taking up for last 3 years in consecution the campaign on celebrating diversity and inclusion at workplace. So continuously they have been trying to design and drive the strategies, approaches on diversity and inclusion at workplace. And running a campaign means learning by doing things. So it was very much a pleasure to hear from the companies this year during the launch meeting that now they have developed a good understanding on why D&I is important, how it leads to improvement in business performance, how it helps in team building and building the efficiency and productivity, and thus overall improvements in business. So now what's next? So they are very keen to learn on global best practices and how can they benchmark so that they can design their KPIs, they can design their action plans around it. And thus we have organized this webinar today. So the main objective of the webinar is to explore what can be the different strategies, approaches, process systems, tools, measures that can be adopted in order to have inclusive workplace, and what can be the various benchmarking tools that can be adopted in order to arrive at KPIs, and how to measure these. And out of the KPIs, what can be the various action plans or initiatives that can be designed in order to drive diversity and inclusion at workplace. So we have some very good speakers lined up today with us. We have Berivan SÜZGÜN. She is the head of talent MESCATA in ENGIE, and she has joined us from Turkey. So welcome, Berivan. We also have Paveline Sago. She's the Talent and Colleague Experience Manager at Serco Middle East. And we have Mira Toukan. She is the lead of UAE Diversity and Inclusion Chapter for Dow Chemicals. So welcome you all once again. And before I start and invite our speakers, I would like to just run a small poll for our audience. So I would request if you can take the poll questions and this short survey. We have 3 questions. Okay, some very interesting answers are coming up. People are still taking the poll, so I'll just wait before I end the poll and share the results. Okay, so I'll just share the results with you all. Okay, people are still taking up. Okay, I'll share the results now. So for the first question, which is on leveraging diversity and inclusion to recognize the perspective and needs of various employees to build a strong team, 97% of the people have said that it's true, and that really shows the understanding that why D&I is important within a business. Managing diversity and inclusion is aligning the unique skills and talents. This is very important for team building and to improve efficiency and productivity. And yes, 92% of our audience have said true. And why we have organized this particular webinar is to understand that how policies and procedures are very, very important in order to follow certain standards and progress on our D&I strategies. So 94% of our audience have said true and agree to this. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking the survey. And now I would like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Berivan SÜZGÜN, Head of Talent MESCATA, ENGIE. Over to you, Berivan.
Thank you. Thank you, Sangeeta. So hello, everyone. First of all, let me briefly introduce myself. This is Berivan SÜZGÜN. I'm working in ENGIE for the last 5 years. And recently I'm working as head of talent in MESCATA region, where we have all the GCC countries, India, Pakistan, Turkey, and recently we also took over South Africa and North Africa in our perimeter. So we are responsible for a large geography, I can say. And for the ones maybe who doesn't know about ENGIE, ENGIE is originally a French company. Now we are international, operating in 70 countries all over the world. And we are specifically working in energy industry on renewable business, thermal, client solutions, and also networks and network networks, when we say network, it's more gas distribution and gas production. So I can start my presentation. Thank you. So I want to start with our sustainability pillar. So what is the general overview of like what is the understanding in ENGIE around sustainability? So we are an energy company, and our purpose is to have a transition towards carbon neutral economy, and this is in our DNA. So starting with that purpose, we have built a pillar, like a sustainability pillar, around a lot of subjects, and you may see the different parts of our sustainability, let's say, engagement. It is in three parts. You see what we want to achieve in terms of environment, enriching our value chain, and also energizing our people. So today I will be mostly focusing on the people part of it, but as a company operating in energy industry, it is really important for us to create a sustainable economy, and it is in the core of our, let's say, DNA. But in specifically for the people, since we are talking about D&I, we are focused on a lot of initiatives around health and safety and well-being of our employees, in educational programs, in like how to have some traineeships, relationship with the universities, also supporting the the countries that we are operating in terms of creating a sustainable workforce in the society. Also human rights, how we can support the baseline of sustain also the human rights in the countries we operate, and diversity and inclusion as a separate subject. So these are the four pillars of the people part of it. And specifically today, I want to mostly focus on the gender parity, because I'm responsible for 50-50 program, which is aiming to have 50% of managerial representation by 2030. Next, please, Sangeeta. I want to start with the video. I think it summarizes why we have this initiative and what is our outlook on this. So let's watch the video first.
Pourquoi?
Dlaczego?
Varför?
Pourquoi?
Pourquoi?
Kim?
Потому что в мире, который становится все сложнее, совместная работа мужчин и женщин – это настоящий путь к успеху.
Because mixed companies achieve better results.
لأن المساواة هي الإيمان بموهبة الجميع بغض النظر عن أصلهم وجنسهم.
Parce que c'est une réalité au sein de mon équipe depuis 5 ans et c'est une excellente expérience.
Por quê?
Pourquoi? Marina.
Pourquoi? Porque na velocidade atual vão ser precisos 170 anos para atingirmos a igualdade financeira entre homens e mulheres.
Porque ENGIE es el pionero de la transición cero carbono y para conseguirlo, la diversidad es una clave del éxito asegurado.
Weil ENGIE nicht nur für nachhaltige Energiezukunft steht, sondern auch für gesellschaftlichen Wandel.
Ponieważ musimy przezwyciężyć nasze uprzedzenia wynikające z naszego dziedzictwa kulturowego.
Perché?
Pourquoi? Warum?
Pourquoi? Perché la diversità richiede degli sforzi, ma tutti ci guadagnano.
Omdat een gezonde balans tussen werk en privé zowel mannen als vrouwen aangaat.
Fordi forældreskabet ikke kun handler om kvinder.
Почему?
Pourquoi?
Pourquoi?
Why?
Pour que plus jamais une petite fille ne puisse s'entendre dire « mais ce n'est pas un métier pour les filles, ça ». Parce qu'aujourd'hui, je suis alternante et demain, j'aimerais être la présidente d'une entreprise du CAC 40.
क्योंकि एनजी प्रोजेक्ट में हमको सबके साथ बराबरी से आगे चलना है.
So as I mentioned, 50-50 is a program for diversity inclusion, specifically around gender parity. And why we started this initiative in the group. So I think it was clear also in the video that diversity inclusion brings a lot of added values also for the company. It's not a social project. It is a business initiative, actually. It's not a CSR project for us. I want to highlight that part especially because it's not just for having a let's say, nice to have thing, but it is important for our strategy to be able to sustain for our sustainable business and financially meaningful business. We believe that diversity is needed in the organization. So next, please, Sangeeta. So why for people, diversity and real inclusion gives the same chances for everybody and provides satisfaction, meaning that you have more satisfied employees in the workforce, which also has an added value in the business. For the planet, to a contribution to the sustainable economy, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, reduction of inequalities in the world, and also working with the society to make a contribution overall. And for profit, again, like diversity brings performance. This is also supported by a lot of studies, academic studies, and also business studies that diversity brings more performance and profit also. It's also business-wise makes sense. Next, please. So in ENGIE, in our approach, we have a group, we said ENGIE group, a corporate initiative on this. So all of the entities all over the world are expected to commit to this initiative. So we have one corporate action plan, but at the same time, we are also given the directive to work on this initiative in the geographies, like myself. Like in MESCATA region, I'm the project lead, and I'm working with a lot of colleagues in our region to make it happen. So we are flexible to deliver our project and to come up with action plans. So we have some corporate initiatives, and also at the same time, we have some, let's say, local initiatives to support and make this happen. And we have a 3 phases plan. So we are aware as a company that it is not an easy mission. So we have to start with the basics. You have to have the basics, then accelerate the project. So the first 3 years is more full, like setting the stone, creating your roadmap, creating a baseline, increasing the awareness, then accelerating the process. We are using the analogy of a rocket. So before sending the rocket to the space, you have a long preparation period. So we are aware of that, and you cannot just launch the rocket. So you have to make it ready before launching it. So until 2030, we have this acceleration plan in 3 phases. Next, please. Since Sangeeta shared with me that a lot of you are interested in the benchmarks and how we are trying to make it happen, I also put that slide to share with you. So this is our corporate business KPI and dashboard. So at the corporate level, there is an outlook to follow all the deliverables of the company, and we also have our local deliverables and KPIs. But what are we looking at this? So it is about gender equality and diversity at the group level. There is a reporting we are asked to deliver around number of female representation in ENGIE, number of again females in GMR and ENGIE Boost programs. GMR means top executive roles. So how many representation you have in top executive roles at the group level, and also in the talent pools. So Boost is a talent pool program. So this is the second KPI we are following up. And again, around gender pay index. So this is also an important KPI that is followed by the group. So the last one is the commitment. So the number of, again, representation in the organization. So we also have the dashboards, as I said, but there's also global Power BI that you can easily track the benchmarks also with the other geographies. We can follow up and also share our action plans, so we can keep a close look at the action plans, etc. So it gives us ease also to benchmark with the other geographies. Next, please. In that slide, I want to give you more insight about specific what are the KPIs. So you see some KPIs around like number of total headcount, representation of women in total headcount, representation of women amongst all management lines, percentage of female external recruitments among managers, and percentage of non-managers promoted to manager role. So these are the key 4 KPIs now we are following. And the other KPIs come in the secondary phase. These are also important. So the second one is around the representation of in the executive committee and talent pools and gender pay index. So I mentioned that like project is called 50-50. So basically we are aiming to have 50% representation in the management positions, 50% of females in the management positions, but it is a global target, and we all have our own, let's say, challenges and dynamics in the regions. Especially in our region, unfortunately, we are starting with a very low number of representation in overall workforce. So we only have 8% of women in the current context. So it is really hard for us to reach the expectation at the global level. This is why we had some discussions and we initiated our own benchmark. So we compared also ourselves with the other countries, where they are starting and what they are aiming for. So we had an internal benchmark within ENGIE. Also, we started analyzing our own numbers, what currently we have and what are the challenges. And when doing that, we just didn't look at the number of women, but we also tried to identify number of available positions for women, because we are a heavy, let's say, we have high risk industry. We are high risk industry. We are operating in energy market, and mostly we have power plants in remote locations in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, etc. So it is not easy to employ women legally also in some cases, because you have to work in shifts, etc. So what we try to do is to first identify realistically what are the available positions for women, then set a realistic KPI, because we believe that if you cannot set the realistic KPI, you cannot also engage the management to work on this and take it seriously. So this is why you see like we are aiming for 24% representation in female management line by 2030, because we believe it is more realistic at the time being. We also identified some KPIs on our, let's say, parameters. So we are also following up engagement survey feedback. So you can identify what type of feedback is given by women and men. So we will follow it up closely also in the coming years to take some action around this feedback, especially around sustainable engagement, managerial behavior, and development and mobility opportunities. So these are the key things we are following up. And also we have talent pools also in MESCATA region, and the representation of women in these talent pools, and how many women we have in the succession pipeline is another KPI and parameter we follow up in our, let's say, in our context. So these are the additional things we wanted to put on the table. Next, please. And how we do it. So I just want to give you an overall framework. We have a 50-50 board at the corporate level, and they are organizing some activities, supporting us with documentation and some policies and initiatives. But at the MESCATA level in our region, we have a steering committee, which is composed by our regional CEO, head of HR, myself, and a general counsel of the region. So we have 4 people who is composing the steering committee, who is trying to ensure the roadmap is there and the action plan is being followed up. we also have a coordination committee, coordination body, where we have a diverse representation from a lot of departments and from the assets and corporate functions to have more diversified point of view and to enrich our action plans. So we are engaging a lot of, let's say, people in our action plan. So it's not just a corporate driven thing, that it is bottom-up approach. We feel that it makes more sense to proceed as such. Next, please. Yeah, so I mentioned that this is about gender parity, but at the same time, it is not a woman project. So for ourselves, we are creating some action plans specifically for a woman, but at the same time, we are working together with men. So we believe that we have to do a lot of actions also together with men. And diversity element is also important. This is why we are trying to promote diversity and inclusive culture in our region, not just the gender parity aspect, but diversity and inclusivity as a general topic. In our region, just for you to know, we have more than 40 nationalities in our company in this region, just for this region. So you can see the richness in terms of culture, heritage, religion, and background. So it makes also sense to business-wise to have an inclusive culture. This is the starting point. And when you have the inclusive culture, it also supports the gender, of course, initiative. So we try to create our action plan around more on diversity and inclusion, but of course, having some activities also only for women. Next, please. And what are we focusing on? So these are the key steps. First of all, we believe a dynamic action plan. So you have to review your action plan all the time and like typical around it when you have some changes. So with the coordination committee and the STIRCO, we try to make it also be a dynamic process. So it starts with the attraction of talents, because as I said, like we have 8% of women. Unless you have more women in the workforce, you can never reach the ambition to have more female managers. So how we can attract from the market and how we can have more women interested in energy industry. This is the starting point. Also recruitment, the second step, to have a more, let's say, inclusive culture in the recruitment process. It started with trainings for our recruitment manager already has that training, for example. It was one of the actions that how to be more inclusive, and also the hiring managers to have that idea and to have this self-awareness around the subject. Integration, how we can, after recruiting the female talents, how we can integrate them in the business and make a sustainable, let's say, a journey in the company is the third pillar. Of course, development is one part of it, how we can support them during this journey, and promoting to make, because we have the ambition to have female managers, so we have to support them in their journey and make sure that there are opportunities for them in the organization to grow. And the last part is retention and departure. This is also something interesting because we want to hear from the women when they're leaving our organization, what makes the decision, like what was the real reason they were leaving the organization. So having some, let's say, feedback from them to work on it. And if there's something we can do, really take it as an action and work on it to make it more positive for the other female talents in the organization. So overall, that's our approach. Next. And yeah, so my last slide, I think I wanted to share some key achievements, like key steps on this way. We have a Power App, like where we follow the KPIs and action plans. So there's a global app application like that you can easily track your KPIs and action plans. The corporate is organizing also some master classes, like best practice sharing webinars. This is also valuable to learn from other companies and also from other entities all over the world. We have a charter, Leadership Way Charter, which is called Angel Leadership Way. Now diversity and inclusion will become a specific part of it. So there will be a new element to focus on diversity and inclusion element. As I mentioned, we already have a steering committee and coordination committee. We also have a women in networking group in MESCATA, where we do some activities specifically for women. Policies, ENGIE has some grant rules and policies, and specifically lastly, the fight against sexual harassment and sexist behavior is a new policy that the group is working on. So that type of policies are also supporting this initiative. We have university and community partnerships to increase our employer branding and also to attract women into our organization. So as I mentioned, it's not just for gender diversity, but also we want to have more diversity in terms of nationalities or backgrounds. So we have leadership development program for nationals, which is specifically for the local nationals in GCC region. So where we have young talents of local nationals, and we invest on them and to develop, to support them in their development journey towards a managerial line. Other than that, we have, again, some training programs, Women to Lead program, strategic workshops, and where we have an academia and university, that we have some trainings around unconscious bias, inclusive leadership, and how to become more inclusive leader in the organization. So these are the key things I can share. Initially, we are taking action. And the last slide is, yes, Sangeeta? Last slides, thank you. So it was my pleasure to present you, and I think we will have a Q&A session at the end of when we have all the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Berivan. I think you took a very good example of one of the pillar of diversity and inclusion, 50-50 for gender empowerment. And you very well explained right from the beginning till end that how you did internal benchmarking, how you then set KPIs, targets, and then make a whole action plan in order to derive that change within an organization towards gender parity. It was very, very informative presentation, and I think you very well explained, you know, that why, first of all, we need to have efforts towards diversity and inclusion to remove prejudices. And at the same time, you were very right in saying that, you know, benchmarking is important, but we have to see that where we are at present. We have to set our targets that are realistic in order to have the seriousness of the management, and in order to achieve and progress slowly on those, and then, you know, set up big targets. Also, I like the fact, and I'm sure our audience will also appreciate when you said that, you know, we have to set the roadmap right in the first 3 years. First 3 years, we have to lay the ground and just prepare before we accelerate and start looking at the results. Mm-hmm. I think I will also appreciate our task force members of diversity and inclusion for the same, because last 3 years we have only been preparing and setting the ground, setting the roadmap, as you said. And it is now this year that they have expressed their desire to learn more about benchmarking and setting the KPIs. So thank you very much, Berivan, for very interesting and informative presentation. And now I would like to request our another speaker, Ms. Paveline Sago. She's a talent and colleague experience manager at SÜZGÜN Middle East. So over to you, Paveline.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Hi, everyone. So like Sangeeta said, my name's Paveline. I lead on diversity and inclusion for SÜZGÜN in the Middle East. And my first few slides are just to provide you some context around SÜZGÜN and basically our overall kind of D&I opportunity and challenge. So SÜZGÜN is a global company. We have a workforce of over 50,000 people globally. We are a public company, which means we have investors, and also we operate over 40 countries, and we have about 500 contracts, which means we have a number of clients that we work with as well. If we move on to the next slide, please, just to give you an idea of what we do. So we partner with governments across the world to provide services in the transport sectors, justice, immigration, citizen services, defense, and healthcare. So just to give you an idea of the complexity around the different sorts of industries we work in, the different sort of kind of cultural backgrounds, professions, and talent within our workforce. So if we move on to the next slide, from a global perspective, D&I within the particular divisions, so for example, in the UK and ASPAC and the Americas, would be quite specific to the communities that they work in. So for us in the Middle East, our kind of diversity and inclusion pillar focuses on gender diversity, nationalization, people of differing abilities, and cultural diversity as well. So we have a very diverse workforce here in the Middle East. We have over 72 nationalities represented in our workforce, which is something that we celebrate, which is great. Across the globe, the two pillars that are consistent within Serco are gender diversity and people of differing abilities. And then we also recognize, in order to kind of embed our diversity and inclusion framework successfully within our business, the most kind of important and sits in the center of this is an inclusive culture. So that's one of the things that is basically underlying all of these pillars. If you just click, Sangeeta, to the next box, just a click. Yeah, sorry, if you go back, sorry. It's a bit delayed on my phone. So globally, our D&I vision is basically embedding a culture where everybody matters. So a culture in which all colleagues are accepted, belong, and are able to perform at their best. So the focus is really about an inclusive culture. And behind that, there's a strategy. There are some numbers, but at the end of it, what we're trying to do is have a culture that's inclusive of all sorts of different human beings. If we move on to the next slide. So from a structure perspective, so a couple of years ago, we started our D&I journey. We realized it's a big thing, and we wanted to implement a kind of a structured approach to reaching our vision of an inclusive culture that is aligned to our values. So we've identified a number of milestones under each of the pillars that we focus on. And the first thing that we realized is we need some sort of sponsorship from the exec leadership team. And the reason for this is because we feel that, if this is something important, then we need to lead this from the top. So we've identified sponsors for each of our pillars. And then the second thing is create awareness, right? So we have a very diverse workforce. We have people in the front line. How do we educate all these people around diversity and inclusion and why it's very important to us as a business, and the culture that we're actually trying to implement? The next step is to then start to create some sort of ambitions and initiatives around each of those pillars. And then embedding it into our processes and our ways of working. So kind of what policies do we need to look at in order to start embedding all of those pillars into our workforce? And then eventually we want it to be embedded in our culture. So it's part of everything that we do. And, at the end of kind of our journey, we wouldn't have an individual diversity and inclusion strategy, because it would be part of everything that we do. So that's kind of like the overall vision of what we're trying to do. At the bottom of that, you see we measure and we track and report. So my presentation today is going to be focused on that, giving some best practice around how we do that as a very diverse kind of company in terms of the industries that we work in, as well as just having a very diverse workforce in terms of talent. So if we move on to the next slide, so the three buckets that we look at when we try to keep ourselves on track on embedding our vision and our frameworks is the first box is ambition. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the one thing that we don't do is we don't like to refer to numbers as targets. And that's just because of the culture in our company. So we've realized that when we start talking about targets, it becomes a little bit of a tick box exercise. We refer to those as ambitions. So, you know, where do we want to be in each of our pillars in the next kind of 3 to 5 years? What's the ambition in each of those? And then how do we measure that? What are the kind of things that we need to look at in order to see where we are in each of our pillars and how we're going? And then benchmarking. So this is a very interesting one in a very diverse company such as Serco, working in various different industries. But the underlying thing with all of this is, as a company, we reflect in the communities that we work and we serve and we operate in. So therefore, we want to be a part of the ambitions and the benchmarks of those particular communities as well. So that's what we take into consideration in kind of all the things that we measure, our ambitions and our benchmarks as well. If we move on to the next slide, so just going to dive into a little bit more detail under each of these. So ambitions, we tend to think about where we want to be strategically. So in the next 3 to 5 years, where do we want our gender pillar to be? Where do we want to be in nationalization, et cetera, et cetera. And we make these public. So from a Serco global perspective, we would go out to the public and say, we have an ambition to have, you know, for example, 30% of women in our leadership team by 2023, for example. Some of the factors that inform our ambition. So first and foremost, the communities that we work in. So in the Middle East, the UAE and the KSA visions of the local governments. So we align to that, and that informs our ambitions as well. The voice of our colleagues. So we're a people business. So we need to listen to our people, how inclusive they feel our culture is, and how do we realize our employee value proposition of how, you know, what we're promising our employees their experience would be within Serco. So that also informs. And then across Serco globally, so we're a public company, we would have requirements from the UK government, being a UK company. So for example, gender pay gap reports and as such. And within some of our contracts with our clients, we have some contractual requirements as well, when it might come to nationalization or gender, etc., just depending on what our clients kind of expect from us when it comes to that. Some of the challenges that we find with ambitions, so sharing best practice around this, is the balancing around targets and culture. So like I said before, we want to think about D&I, and we try as much as to implement it as a culture. But we do have numbers, we have ambitions, and how do we balance that in the business? So we obviously want our kind of business to be accountable for D&I, because it's not just an HR thing. But sometimes we see that, you know, they get really committed to it, and then we start to see bias. So for example, if there was a certain position where a female was leading it, and that person left, we would like it to be a fair and equal opportunity for all, not just for a female, so that a manager can tick a box and say, well, I'll put a female in that kind of role. So that's sometimes a challenge. Buy-in from the business. So and I think a lot of companies face this. So how do we position diversity and inclusion as a business challenge and not just an HR challenge? So we're on a journey. Some of the learnings, be intentional and realistic about your ambition. So what I mean by that is a lot of the time we want to be, you know, our overall ambition would be, let's have a 50-50 gender split, for example, or 60-40 or whatever that looks like for us. But how realistic is that in 2 to 3 years? So we have a little bit of a phased approach to say within 2 to 3 years, we'll have, you know, 20%, 30%, etc., so that it's also a little bit achievable for the business as well. And then the other thing is accountability. I spoke about that. So, you know, getting the business to be accountable for our ambitions as a company as well. So on to the next slide. Measures. So measuring, I think, is super important. How do we actually know that we're doing the right thing? How do we know what we're doing is actually making an impact? So we look at measuring in two ways, quantitative and qualitative. So we do a lot of kind of data analysis. Some of the things that we look at, and a lot of other companies do, would be kind of percentages around attrition, that are actually related to our pillars. Promotions, kind of talent attraction. How many females do we have wanting to work for Serco? How many people with disabilities do we have applying to work for Serco? That kind of thing. And also then that kind of informs us to how is our EVP actually positioned externally, and kind of what do we need to do in order to get that out there as well. And then we have participation in networks as well. So Serco globally, we have networks that are they're basically built up by colleagues across Serco who are passionate about diversity and inclusion as well. And we try to get as many people as possible to start participating in these networks. And that's another measure for us. So how many people actually participating because they feel that we do have an inclusive culture and they want to be part of this. So those are some of the things that we measure in terms of quantitative. But I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, the qualitative part of measure is equally as important. So diversity and inclusion is about people. How do we hear them? How do we listen to what they feel outside of numbers? So a lot of the stuff that we do is, we'll have actually one-to-one experiences with a number of females, for example, across the business to see, how do they feel Serco supports them. We do a number of awareness campaigns, roadshows. We celebrate a lot of success. So if we're celebrating success, it kind of means that, the measure is that we're doing well. And we get feedback from clients and communities as well that we work in. So those are kind of some of the measures. Some of the challenges that we find in this area is the availability of colleague data. So as a UK company, we follow the GDPR rules, which is basically a data protection law in the UK. So a lot of the information around diversity and inclusion is voluntary. And some colleagues don't, prefer not to disclose that. So when it comes to data analytics, we find it a bit challenging to be able to analyze the areas that would want to in the absence of that data. So some learnings, I think when we started doing kind of like D&I dashboards and measures, we wanted to measure everything. And you can very quickly create dashboards and reports and all sorts of stuff that are not really telling you the story that you want or telling you the impact that you're having. So one of the learnings I would say on this is, what are the top 5 to 10 things that you want to measure that can really track your ambition and inform where you are and the impact that you're having. Okay, next slide, please. So benchmarking. So this is a challenge for a company like Serco. So we operate in obviously various different industries, and the availability of benchmarking data is often not there. So what we do internally is we kind of benchmark where we can with the things that are important to us. So for example, the visions of KSA and UAE in the region. That's one thing that, our ambition is to align to those and even probably be better or above the mark on those. And we use that as a benchmark. So in the absence of actually getting industry benchmarking for the areas that we focus on, those are some things that we look at. The other thing that we can do, so we look at UK government requirements. So that's a little bit of a benchmark for Serco globally in terms of things like gender pay gap, the split of gender, different types of gender and stuff like that. Our PLC board, so they often set us ambitions. So where are we in benchmark to that? The other thing that we do is we benchmark against our customers. So if we, and our clients, so if we wanted to partner with a client, what is our D&I? How do we do in comparison with them as well? And then we look at best practices like a lot of people do. So, you know, what are other companies doing that can actually work for us, that might be in a similar industry as us. So again, challenges, the availability of benchmarking data for us, learning. So setting internal benchmarks is actually something that we do a lot in the absence of kind of external benchmarking data. So just to go into a little bit of detail around this. So what we do is we know in the different industries that we work in, we realize that, you know, some are male dominated industries and others are not, for example, and which industries can we then push forward to reach our ambition quicker? As well as, you know, so for example, what kind of roles do we have in our business where people with disabilities can easily take on depending on the disability that they have? So going into a little bit of a deeper dive into the nitty-gritty of our data and our roles and stuff like that, to really start benchmarking and also informing our ambitions as well. And then, you know, one thing I just think is, you know, D&I is about humans. It's complex, and benchmarking, yes, it's important, but I think you know, going out there and speaking to our colleagues about their colleague experience and, you know, how they feel included within the culture that we're trying to achieve, that's also a very important benchmark for us. So I'll move on to the next slide. I just wanted to share one of our great achievements that we've done kind of this year. So a couple of years ago, we had an ambition to reach 30% of a gender split at our leadership level. So following the kind of milestones that we set out under the gender pillar. So we obviously had an exec sponsor. We created awareness, so we did a various amount of comms, we did awareness campaigns, you know, diversity and inclusion is directly linked to our SÜZGÜN values, so really putting it out there. We did a lot of case studies around females in our business, and we celebrated success externally as well, just so that our clients know that we are an inclusive company and we support gender diversity, etc. And then the ambition was to reach a 30% split at leadership level. And some of the initiatives that we implemented were around development initiatives. So what kind of support are we providing our female colleagues to be able to progress within SÜZGÜN? You know, targeted development plans, we have some mentoring programs. And then we embedded it into our ways of working. So within our talent review process, for example, this is something that we look at in terms of all our pillars. We looked at some of our policies, so our maternity policies, our part-time working policies, so that we're a little bit more attractive to females in the industry. We have flexible working policies as well, and a recruitment focus. So we were basically trying to build a pipeline of future female leaders. And if you just click, please, Sangeeta. Yeah, so we reached, this year reached a 42% gender split at our leadership level, which we're super proud of. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of buy-in, a lot of kind of embedding the right behaviors, inclusive behaviors in our business. And so really super achievement for us. We actually surpassed the 30% ambition, and we've reached 42% at our leadership level. So that's really cool. Just wanted to share that. And next slide, I think that's all from me. Yeah, so thank you very much for your kind attention. I'll hand back to Sangeeta now.
Thank you very much, Pavleen. It was really wonderful listening to you. I think it was a very enlightening presentation. Yes. And really, I like the fact that you said that, you know, it's all about a journey. And, you know, right from starting, from creating an awareness. In fact, you started with a step, you know, prior to that is getting the management on board. So which is very, very important. And then in order to percolate it down, you know, creating awareness. And then last is to actually create a value, embedded it into the value and the culture of an organization. So it was very interesting to hear how you have moved, from the first step, and you are continuously progressing on. Another thing I'm sure our audience must have also liked, I of course like the fact that you called the targets as ambition. Yeah. Because yes, I have been discussing with a lot of companies, a lot of speakers on this particular aspect, and they have said that, the moment you say it's a target, it's a number, sometimes it does gets manipulated. Sometimes it then just becomes a tick box exercise, as you rightly said. So calling it an ambition is much more in terms of achieving as dream rather than achieving it just as a target, and so just running after that. And I like the fact that you mentioned that, how do we measure? So measuring is not just in terms of the quantitative data, but also experiences of the employees. I mean, after all, why are we having this discussion? Because we have understood that, how diversity and inclusion helps in team building. So till the time we are not taking care of the experiences of the people, I think we are missing big time on our diversity and inclusion, core strategy and a framework. So thank you very much for highlighting that. And benchmarking, as you very rightly pointed out, that, it has to be according to the local context. It has to be done internally before you look at any external data. And it's very important, again, as you said, that, employees' value proposition. So thank you very much, Berivan, for highlighting all these points. And I'm sure these will be very, very useful for our companies who are, setting up and starting their journey on benchmarking and setting the KPIs. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Mira Toukan. She is the UAE Diversity and Inclusion Lead for Dow Chemicals. So over to you, Mira.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be taking part of this opportunity and alongside many I&D stakeholders in the UAE. So as Sangeeta mentioned, my name is Mira Toukan, and I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Lead for the UAE at Dow. For those of you who don't know, Dow is an American multinational material science company. And then before I delve right into it, I would just like to highlight that D&I is usually handled by HR in a lot of companies, but not at Dow. At Dow, we make it separate. So we are one of the few companies actually that has an inclusion office in the C-suite. So this is why I'm not part of the HR, but I'm leading diversity and inclusion out separately. Next slide, Sangeeta. So before I also share with you today Dow's actions in I&D, what are the steps that are we taking, how we're comparing ourselves with others, it is very crucial for us to understand why we're doing this. So this is why, or what I would like to call the business case for I&D. Usually there are several studies conducted around this topic, but they all agree that I&D is one of the main factors for the winning formula. So first of all, you are capturing as much as talent from a larger pool of audience. You are improving the quality of decision-making because you're adding diverse opinions. You're also driving innovation and customer insight into that. And also, most importantly, you are motivating the employees by making them feel safe and comfortable at work and giving out more of their best work. And lastly, this is also a reflection of the company's image of how it is. In terms of statistics or facts, the McKinsey company have done some studies around that, and they realized that this is yielding actually 10% higher on return on equity. So you're seeing a higher increase in profit, about 9% increase in sales revenue, and 48% higher in earnings. So this is a very good business case study to see that I&D should be the main focus in moving forward. Next slide, please. Looking into the benchmarking, or the highlight of today's topic, I would just wanted to give you some few examples of where Dow stands. So looking at the Dow Executive Committee, we're comparing it amongst industry peers and proxy peers. So those that are within the chemical industry or the material science industry. So our executive committee has the second highest percentage of female representation, as you can see from the figures, and fourth highest percent of ethnically diverse leaders amongst our industry peers. So these are the two factors that we were looking at here, the gender and the ethnicity. So we can see clearly Dow is represented in red, and the blue one, or the dark blue one, is represented as the benchmark. So as you can see, we are doing well in that field in both, but this is not only what stops here. This is a long journey that we need to take and to move forward. Next slide, please, Sangeeta. As for the Dow Board of Directors, so now looking at different rankings within the company. So the Dow Board is the third most ethnically diverse in the industry and the fourth most among the influential peers. Also, it is in the top quartile percentage for the female board representation. So we are exceeding the average in both the gender and ethnic diversity. And as I mentioned earlier, is that the numbers are encouraging, but there's always room for improvement, and there's also more work to do, because we also have to look at different diversity spectrums and looking also within the regions. Like there's a lot of more work that needs to be done on managerial positions, specifically in the UAE when it comes to females. Next slide, please. So based on those benchmarking and the journey that I just discussed earlier, we have put in place the 2021 framework and strategy, or what I would like to talk the actions. As a vision statement, we want to be leading in inclusion. We want to be authentic, respectful, and equitable. And we have divided them amongst three different pillars: the enable, the experience, and the impact. By enabling, we want to pursue diversity and equity at all levels of the organization. So this is important to ensure that is covered from top to bottom. Also, we want to expand the dimensions of diversity that is being monitored, increase the gender diversity, and implement inclusive policies and framework. We already have a lot in place. We want to continue implementation of that and also enforcing them even more strongly. As the experience part, which is very important for us at Dow, we want to make sure that all employees are feeling inclusive in the most meaningful manner. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, we mentioned that I&D is complex because as humans we are complex. So this is something that we definitely need to take into consideration, and always making feeling the employees feeling included. We want to focus on the intellectual awareness, the psychological safety, which I will also discuss further in next slides, and in adopting the inclusion in some business decisions in a lot of cases. As for the impact, this is where we see how the I&D culture is influencing the industries, how we are working alongside with our business partners, and also with our suppliers and direct customers, because we want to make sure that we are driving the competitive advantage with external partners. Also, we will be focusing on advancing internal targets and external reputation, and engaging a lot of our associations and the communities to attract more talent in this industry and in this geography. As for the key measures of success, so what are the different KPIs or things that we look at when we're measuring I&D? So we're looking at the diversity dimension. We have a survey that is released in order to hear the voice of the employees, in which they let us know if they're feeling comfortable, if there's any issues, based on several questions. ERG participation, or what it stands for, employee resource groups, that I will explain further in the next few slides. And this is something very important to us. Workforce representation, supplier diversity spend. We also look into our external partners and the recognitions that have been put in place externally. So as I mentioned earlier, we have many various ERGs. Next slide, please, Sangeeta. So as I mentioned, no, the slide before, sorry, I think I have a delay. Yeah. So as part of the pillars that I was talking about, the experience is very important. So we have set together several networks or groups that we call employee resource groups that cover different parts of the diversity spectrum, whether it is age, whether it is the gender, whether it is the ethnicity, and we try to make sure that they are all covered and represented in various ways. 40% of the total Dow population is part of an ERG, and this is something that we are highly focusing on to make sure that the employees are feeling welcome and included in any of the various groups. And we also have a lot of Emerge conference in which a lot of leadership and employees from all around the globe join together in order to discuss important matters around inclusion on a business level. So this is something to ensure that everyone is feeling safe and welcome in the company. To give a few examples on the KPIs that we put in place, because as a consequence, This is why, as a consequence, I&D metrics are part of our global company metrics. So we're looking at our different KPIs that we have divided them amongst the following, and I will take you through them one by one. Next slide, please, Sangeeta. So the gender, we have a women network called the Women Innovation Network that is supporting professional development of women all around the world. You offer them networking opportunities, you offer them mentorship, you give them access to professional development and career growth. And this is something that we focus very well in the UAE specifically. We want to ensure that women are feeling strong enough, equipped with the right tools in order to grow their careers and reach more managerial positions and not get stuck at the entry level. This is one example as gender. Next slide, we look at the ethnicity. So we have various groups covering different ethnic groups. We have the Global African, we have the Hispanic and Latin, Asian Diversity Network, and the Middle Eastern Network, Middle East North Africa Network. They all work on breaking stereotypes, bringing awareness and inclusion for the different groups. And they provide also development and activities, trainings to make sure that all of these talents are seen in different parts of the world. So some of the examples is that we try to kind of send on certain programs people from different locations so they can engage in different areas, understand the culture, and also try to increase the chances for their career growth in different various regions. So this is one of the examples that we work on in the ethnic group. In the second slide, we will see the age category. Next slide, Sangeeta, please. In which we have two main ERGs or groups that are called Rise and Prime. They are both offering mentorship, career development, and the Rise focuses on the ones who have less experience at Dow, so maybe the newly joined companies or people with less than 8 years of experience. There versus the Prime who have more experience in the work fields and at Dow. So we're trying to learn from these experiences and knowledge together. And we kind of offer reverse mentoring and mentoring a lot of field into that to also learn from one another. And this is where we kind of look in the KPIs and understand where we stand in each of these following categories. And last but not least, the next slide, please, Sangeeta. We're looking at the physical or the cognitive abilities. So we really want to focus on improving the perceptions of the people with disabilities. And we want to raise awareness. There's a lot of sessions and trainings that are being taken place. We'll also have them as part of our KPIs that we need to ensure we have a certain percentage of our employees who belong to those categories. And last but not least, also the VetNet, which is more in the American side, considering it's an American company, not highly seen in the UAE, but they also mentor active service members. So these are various things that we try to look and focus on as KPIs. As I mentioned, next slide, please, Sangeeta. As I mentioned, because of our previous efforts and KPIs, it's been a long journey across many years. And it doesn't stop there. But I just wanted to give you some of the few recognitions that I&D had for Dow. So we've been nominated as the best places to work across 15 years. We've had also recognitions in the disability side, also nominated as the People for Companies That Care, and certified in 8 countries as a great place to work, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia in this region. So we're looking at all of those external benchmarking techniques, I would say, but also internally, we focus on having certain KPIs on our own. So we want to ensure that all the senior leadership at Dow need to be sponsored or involved in one of those networks of the employee resource groups that I just discussed. We want to see active participation and employee engagement in those events and conferences. As for the external part, Dow Inclusion Strategy also wants to impact the external stakeholders. So we want to include the value chain partners, such as our customers, suppliers, to also follow our journey and path. Because again, this is a collaborative work that we need to do together with our partners to reach where we are. Next slide, please. As always, there's always some challenges when we talk about benchmarking. I think some of them were already mentioned by the other speakers, but again, we need to focus on certain things. Sometimes it is not very, you need to support I&D regardless of what it is, because this is something that touches the human aspect of things. So we should not always be focusing on benchmarking, focusing on, reaching certain numbers, and then if we do, we stop the journey. No, we need to look at the bigger picture, and we need to keep focused on getting better and better. Also, defining the KPIs and metrics. As I mentioned, this is complex. It is not always clear what to measure because some things cannot be measured very easily. So we need to set the proper metrics as well on what exists currently and the new metrics to be created. A few examples is number of people that are joining those employee resource groups or networks, number of activities that are being done, how active the participation we see, of course, the gender and leadership representations across the regions, because this is also important. And leveraging tools across the regions. Sometimes you need to know how to properly leverage across the regions the different KPIs in order to make sure that they are covering different parts and being inclusive. And this is why I mentioned earlier, we have the global yearly survey in which we call The Voice, to hear the voice of the employees, to kind of take enough information or data on how the employees are feeling in terms of the IND umbrella. Next slide, please. So to wrap this up, or in conclusion, some of the key messages that I would like to focus on is that it's not only about inclusion and diversity, it's inclusion, diversity, and equity. It's all three buckets that need to be focused on. And this needs to be supported at every level of the company, not only from the top level or from the bottom, but across all. And also we need to ensure that benchmarking against the peers is done in the right way in order to know where we stand in the industry, in the community, or in the region, because using those proper metrics will help us see where we want to reach and where we want to go. But this shouldn't stop here. As I mentioned, this is a long journey that needs to be followed thoroughly, and you need to always motivate yourself to become better and not just achieve, ticking some points. And last but not least, the decision-making should ensure that all the different diversities are included in the decision-making process, because this can only help us become better and better. Thank you for your time today and for listening about Dow's IND and benchmarking techniques. And I'll hand it back to you, Sangeeta.
Thank you very much, Mira. Really, it was a very nice presentation, very informative, and so many points that, one can really just quickly adopt and implement at their workplace. So really, thank you very much. I think I like the fact that you said it's more about employee satisfaction. In fact, the whole diversity and inclusion is about giving a better experience to each and every employee, no matter to which background do they belong to. And I think for that reason, you very well explained the whole journey, right from, benchmarking as compared to other organizations, using different global standards for benchmarking, and then driving your action plan, which is more based on, educating, engaging, and enabling people, and then knowing how their experiences have been, and assessing the impact. So thank you very much. And I think the most interesting part also is that you said 40% of the employees are in employee resource groups, which itself is a huge thing to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that, yes, how important and how seriously diversity and inclusion is taken up into. So thank you very much, Mira, for explaining it all well. And now we will have a look at some of the questions. So I would like to invite all our speakers for the Q&A session. I think we have one question, which is that when does the D&I strategy move from inclusion of all the different aspects of diversity to specific gender equality initiatives? I think from among our audience, it's Mohamed Mazid who have raised this question. So I think we have given a specific example related to gender in one of the presentation, and then different examples have come across. So we have this question. I would request if Berivan can take up this. Berivan?
Okay, sure, Sangeeta. So just to clarify, are we talking about the question on Q&A, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the
getting...
question actually is that we are talking about D&I strategy, and we are also talking about different aspects of diversity and inclusion. And why have you specifically taken an example of gender equality initiative to explain benchmarking right from the beginning
Yes.
to the end?
Yes. Actually, because ENGIE, this is a non-financial KPI for ENGIE, first of all. As I said, it is not a CSR project or the goodwill. It is one of our non-financial KPIs, which we committed to the market. We are also operating in the markets, and this is our promise to our investors that we will make it happen by 2030. So this is why it is a very clear target and a non-financial KPI. And I'm also proud to say that our global CEO is a woman. Our previous CEO was also a woman. So it's really rare to find a female CEO in the energy industry, and also especially even in Europe. It's really hard, and it's still, this ambition is also supported by the top executives of the company, I can say.
Thank you very much, Berivan. Actually, I have one question for all the speakers, and any speaker can please feel free to answer that. Yes, your presentations have very well explained, the whole journey of D&I. What do you think? Is it that the company should implement certain initiatives first and then look at the benchmarking which is existing? Or is it that the starting point itself has to be benchmarking and setting KPIs and then start rest of the process? What do you think is more important within an organization to drive and design diversity and inclusion?
If I may start.
Yes,
so I think it goes hand in hand, not necessarily following each other. It goes hand in hand, and you also constantly have to look at your KPIs and action plans, as I mentioned before. Like it is not written on stone. You can always update it, but in order to start your ambition, you have to start with with the target first, like to know what is at your hand, to utilize your own, strengths, to know what you have at the end of the day. So I think it goes hand in hand, and but you can always change on the way.
If I also may add, I think it's very crucial to understand where you are in order to know what to fix. So maybe it is a good idea to look into benchmarking originally to see where you stand and what are the different aspects that you need to fix. And then, as Berivan mentioned, then you can in parallel work together to always be benchmarking and doing the initiatives to become better. But originally, in order to start off, you need to know what is the problem or the issue that needs to be focused on.
Thank you very much, Mira. Pavili, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think my response would be quite similar. So I don't know if there's an actual kind of this first or this first. I think it goes hand in hand. So like for us, for example, like I said, it's about the communities that we work in. And one of the things that we look at is the visions of the countries that we work in. So the UAE and KSA in terms of nationalization and gender. That we use that as a bit of a benchmark when informing our ambitions. But it's also kind of internally what we're trying to achieve, and then globally what we're trying to achieve. So it is a bit of a hand in hand. I would agree with the two speakers as well.
Thank you very much, Pavleen. And I just have one more question, and this our audience have already told me to ask, so I'm asking on behalf of all of them, that how to measure the impact of diversity and inclusion initiatives. Fine, we have set up a benchmark, we are taking a lot of initiatives, action plan, we have the KPIs in order to drive our action plan. How do we now check the impact? Because as many of you have said that, we need to also take care of the employees' experiences. Now, what can be the different indicators in order to measure that impact of D&I initiatives and to know that how well, we are running it and how it is moving into the right direction? Again, this question is open to all.
I'll go first if you don't mind. So I think for me, it's two things. It's an internal view and it's an external view. So for example, externally, we have been recognized by Mori, for example, and some of the leaders in the country for our efforts in nationalization within the UAE. So that's kind of how we measure the impact of some of the things that we do within nationalization, for example, and a little bit of the gender diversity bit as well. I think internally it's really about our colleagues, right? So how inclusive do they feel? Do they feel they have opportunities to grow within SÜZGÜN? Do they feel that they belong? And that's measured by a couple of things. So through our employee engagement surveys, that's number one. So we do that annually, but we do that and going to start doing that more regularly now as well. But also through that qualitative kind of measure that I spoke about before, is actually speaking to your colleagues on the ground about their experience of working at SÜZGÜN. And I think that's another way of really gauging the impact that you're having as well.
Thank you very much, Pavali. Berivan, if you would like to add something, or Mira?
Yeah, maybe just I already shared that we have a survey, like employee satisfaction survey every year. So in the survey, there are some clear questions that you can get feedback from the employees, both women and men. So I think this is a nice way of measuring your progress every year. But other than that, we can also do like in the retention part, you can see the feedback. Like if the employee is leaving, you can get a direct feedback from the employee, or with the talent talks that you do regularly, you can also get feedback during this meeting. So I would say informally also. So, but there are like very clear measurements, but also there are like people oriented. You can get feedback directly from the people.
Thank you very much, Berivan. And we have two more questions. One is how to motivate employees to, participate actively in D&I programs.
Yeah. Sorry, Sangeeta, can you repeat the question?
Yes. How do you motivate employees to participate actively in your D&I programs? So how can we engage them? How can we, motivate them to encourage? I think, Mira, you have already, said a lot about ERG groups.
So the way we do it at DAO, I mean, the employees themselves should be wanting to and encouraged to join some of these activities and initiatives. Because this is done for them. So this is why it is important or crucial for them to feel connected to any of the various initiatives or groups. As long as they feel that this is one that they are connected with or feel that this is something that they would like to work on, then they're definitely encouraged. And also what we do is that we let leadership kind of walk the talk. So we let them kind of lead the way, encourage their teams to join those initiatives. Nothing is done obligatory, of course, but as long as you see leadership involved more and more joining these initiatives, the employees automatically will also be following that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mira. I completely agree that, if leadership is there on board, then employees do, get encouraged automatically to participate quite actively.
Exactly.
Now, our last question is from Vinny Cavento. He is asking that what is the most difficult part of implementing D&I initiative, and how would you like to address this barrier? I am pretty sure that you have already talked about a lot of challenges during your presentation in either benchmarking or in implementing the action plan. So is there something which is the most difficult part?
For me, maybe I can share. I think the most difficult part is the type of business you're operating, like the realities of the business. For our case, we are an energy company, and we have, as I said, like power plants. in very remote locations. We have shift system, and legally speaking, you cannot employ women. Also, socially, it is not easy to employ women in the environment. In this environment, also in our region, it is more complicated, you know. So that is the main, I think, barrier. The realities of the world, because of the type of business you do. Also, it also comes hand in hand with the society. Like, what is the environment in this country? Like, because you have this ambition, but for example, I want to recruit more women, but do we have enough talents in the market to do so? That's also nothing we can directly impact immediately. It takes some time. It starts from early years of education until graduation. It is, all in all, it's not easy, you know, so it cannot be just one company's ambition that you can achieve it. So that's the main, I think, barrier.
Thank you very much, Berivan, and I completely agree with you. I have a similar experience in dealing and recruiting with recruiting people of determination at workplace. When we were looking at hearing challenged people for coffee shops, and I was the one who was actually searching a lot from one special needs center to another, looking for the right candidates, and I realized that in the whole of a region, the hearing challenged are very limited number of people who are either fully engaged already in an employment, or they are still pursuing their studies. So I can understand sometimes pursuing your goals becomes difficult as per the local conditions, the realities. But yes, we need to still keep our focus intact and continue on our journey. So this is it. For all the questions we have, heard from our speakers. Thank you so much for giving very insightful presentations, very informative. I'm sure you have inspired and encouraged all our member companies, all our audience. Thank you very much once again. And I would also like to say thanks to our audience who have joined today. And I'm sure it must be a good learning experience for all of them. And last but not the least, I would also like to thank my colleague, Charles, who have been there all throughout, as a co-host, supporting the whole webinar. So thank you very much, and look forward to having you with us again.
Thank you, Sangeeta. It was our pleasure.
Thank you, Sangeeta.
Thank you. Thank you very much.